Last time we talked about Karen, and the potential paths her story can take, as well as her general obsession with the Kaiser and figuring out the truth of the world. But Karen's not just obsessed with the Kaiser and the Bremen, but also with a shadowy faction called the New Gods. She had heard about a secret society named as such, who purportedly aid the Kaiser in enacting some kind of devious plan across Europa. Figuring out that plan is what motivates Karen to travel to Preheville in the first place. Ironically enough, she finds the being she hunts immediately when she's transported to their Great Hall. If she does realise that these mysterious beings are the New Gods, she doesn't comment on it. But the New Gods have a greater presence in Preheville than this brief cameo. The New Gods were arguably the main antagonists of the first game. I've already done a video on them though, which mainly focuses on the Fellowship and what they're up to during their era. So for this video I'll be sticking to the New Gods we encounter in Termina. We can meet 4 New Gods during the events of the game, and despite talk of conspiracy, they don't seem to be immediately connected to one another, or indeed the Great Hall. 2 of them are vendors, and the other 2 are optional bosses. It's possible to play the game without ever encountering any of them, which does raise the question, are they in fact actually working together? When exploring the basements of the Old Town, we'll come across a strange sight, a ritual circle. There are 3 types of ritual circles we can find throughout Preheville. This one is an imperfect circle, rather hilariously named if you know anything about the New Gods and their insecurities and hang-ups. We can only find this kind of circle in 3 locations: the Old Town's basement, the Orphanage's basement, and the Church of Alma's basement. Bit of a running theme here. 2 of these locations directly controlled by the priests of Preheville, and the third, the basement in Old Town, also likely was once upon a time. So from this we can infer that summoning said New Gods had some kind of utility for the Church of Alma. But it's difficult to rightly say what that utility was, or at least it is right now. We should quickly talk about how a New God is created. We know from the first game that it requires sitting on the Throne of Ascension in Mahab, and travelling to the Void. From there you have to seek out your own New God form, which is a reflection of your own soul, your own innermost desires, at which point it will essentially replace you and carry out your will in the world, until somebody comes along, kills it, and repeats the process all over again. When a New God dies, they go to the Hall of the Gods, in most cases, where they sit for all eternity, advising and guiding the New Gods that come after them. The imperfect circles then act as conduits to summon them individually, albeit for brief moments. And in Termina, we can summon 4. The first New God we can encounter is actually Nas'hrah, but this is only if we play as Osar, and the bodiless wizard is probably the most influential one of the bunch. Osar finds him in the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, buried deep within the place's structure, though he's disfigured and burned, and nowhere near as powerful as he was in the first game, and really only recognisable because of his great mustache. But how did he get this way? The TLDR version is he fucked around and found out. In the B ending of Fear and Hunger, if you confront Grogorov's traces with Nas'hrah in your party, the old one one-shots the uppity old bastard. In the context of that game, this is a brown trousers moment by the way. In Fear and Hunger, Nas'hrah can't die to any attack. Even if he loses all of his health, he just laughs it off. What a king. So when the chief of the old god pantheon just smacks him up, you can't help but suddenly think about all the mistakes you've made up to this point. Nas'hrah is the master of the Yellow Mages, a group of people who worship and leech off of Grogorov's power, making them masters of destruction magic. Nas'hrah was foolish for confronting his main benefactor. He's a character who's very influential to the story and plot of the series, and I have plans to expand on that in another video, but for now I'll say this: his motivation is to ruin the Guard's plan, and maybe sodomize him if he finds the time, and there's no way he'd ever work with the New Gods in any capacity. The next one we're most likely to encounter is the Tainted One. They're one of the few New Gods introduced in Termina that we can actually ask about in the first game. What an oddly specific thing to ask. The Tainted One is of course one of us, one of the many who sits in the Grand Hall, a person born with a soul that is tainted, and who then rose to the Tainted One has the tainted soul, a trait she shares with Marco. We don't have direct information on what the tainted soul is. With Enki's enlightened soul, we know he has an insatiable thirst for knowledge, for example, and the same seems to apply to Voltiel and Marina, though there's clearly a bit of a spectrum for how obsessed one becomes. Making inferences from Marco's background though, it seems that a Tainted One will face situations in their life where they're compelled to betray their morality. In Marco's backstory, he kills somebody in a boxing ring, on the orders of a mafia boss who threatens Marco's sister. The guilt of the event will haunt Marco throughout his trip through Preheville. It's likely the Tainted One underwent their own internal struggle, based on their dialogue. Unbearable existence. The suffering. The agony. We play the secret song that echoes from within. That sound is like razors through flesh. Can you hear it? What a drama queen. Cards on the table, I actually used to think this was Darce, and that the Tainted title came about because Darce betrayed her true soul nature. She has a dominant soul, and my initial speculation was that by being subservient to the god, she tainted herself. Though I'm pretty sure since then Miro has clarified that soul types are specifically tied to what time of the month one is born in. Oh well. The Tainted One takes the same inspiration as the Tormented One, that being they both derive their overall visual themes from the Cenobites, with the Tainted One outright quoting them. Farewell, O explorers of the further regions. The Tainted One can be summoned by sacrificing human heads to the imperfect circle. Don't ask me how I figured that out. At which point they'll rise from a pool of blood and monologue at us, before giving us soulstone shards in exchange for heads, which we can spend at the Hexen table to acquire new powers. The Tainted One doesn't have any explicit allegiances, but is far more helpful to the player than any of their other colleagues. The Soul Stones allowing the player to access supernatural powers that would make their time in Preheville a lot easier. The next new god we're most likely to encounter is the Radiant One. The Radiant One is probably the most enigmatic new god we've met so far. When we summon him, we're confronted with a little goblin man in a gimp mask, lazily floating in the air. Embrace your flaws. Embrace the imperfections. Embrace the distortions. The being shares a radiant soul with Samurai. Samurai is a shy, demure woman. This is likely due to her background of being experimented on at the Vatican. It's clear she's unstable and deeply insecure. Who are you? No one. Just a lonely caterpillar waiting to shed her skin. The portrait of a young man is the method by which the god is summoned. It has to be offered at the altar. An old portrait photograph of a young man. It looks like the photo was taken in the late 1800s. The person's face has been scratched over, and it's beyond recognition. The portrait is strange. 3 can be found throughout the city, one of them oddly being in the mold apartments. The scratched out face seems to be specific to the Radiant One's character. Perhaps he, like Samurai, viewed his original form as a mere vessel for something more beautiful underneath. This then would be a common trait with the Radiant Soul, viewing themselves as imperfect and distorted, and both of the Radiant Ones we encounter have different reactions to this self-perception. The Radiant One embraces the flaws, and advises that others do the same. Samurai has a more unhealthy way of dealing with these feelings, but that's for another video. Like the Tainted One, we're unable to fight the being, but they will trade with us for rust-covered pills, which can only be acquired by going to Rare's dimension. Samurai is the only other character in the game who has a radiating soul, and in Samurai we find an unstable, delusional character who has been brutalized by the world around her. We do know somebody else with a radiant soul, but they aren't important for the purposes of this video, but we do have a question lingering. Who exactly is the Radiating One? I do have one possible theory to offer on his original identity, but I'll be honest from the out that my evidence for it is a bit thin to say the least. But I believe that the Radiant One is the new god form of torture. The first evidence I would offer is his available wares. His most expensive item is the Mauler, a barbed two-handed club that visually looks like it has some dried blood on it, and is pretty much identical to the weapon used by the Crow Mauler from the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. The only other way to get it is from the Gull Brothers, special bosses that are exclusive to Termina's hardest mode, something the dungeon's torturer would have been able to extract off the good captain's body should he have encountered it. My second piece of evidence would be Torturer's intelligence. Torturer was more aware of the grand scheme of things than most would probably like to give him credit for. In a note that I believe is deleted content as I've never been able to find it in the game, Torturer writes about Captain Rudimer being naive and unaware of High Priest Celine's intentions for the guard, implying that he knows her potential true identity that I've speculated to be either Nilvan or Nostramus in a previous video. It also implies that he may be aware of Mahab. It's not out of the realm of possibility that once the dungeon was more or less cleared by Enki and Ragnarvolda, with a little help, that Torture just waltzed down to the throne of Ascension. Torture has a fascination with torture and desecration. He talks about finding true beauty that lies beneath the skin, in the tendons and glistening muscles, And the Radiant One talks about embracing imperfections and distortions, but before that he was a great knight for the Kingdom of Rondon, renowned, respected, and possibly handsome before he was captured and tortured over the course of years, turned into what he was when we found him in the first game. If we befriend Torture in the game, he can talk about his experience, and how he actually views his own capture as a good thing. In a cutscene where he can torture the player to death, he talks about finding the beauty within, invoking Samurai's comment on becoming a butterfly. Visually, Torture and the Radiant One are also similar, in that they're both twisted goblin creatures. But nevertheless, why would he want us to go to Rare's dimension of all places? After all, that's the only place we can find the rust-covered pearls. Well, the dimension has several important items inside that are crucial to the characters fulfilling the wishes of Le'Garde and the new gods. Strangely, Prehyville's priests have a fascination with the pearls, and will stop attacking you if you hand one over, though as of right now I don't know if there's a connection here or if it's just a coincidence. Thirdly, we have Ron Shambara, the Tormented One. The Tormented One was one of the Fellowship, the new gods who ruled in the last age. Despite being called the Fellowship, as though they were a united front, we find that each god has their own agenda, separate from one another, with each trying to find a way to extend the rule of the new gods, and escape the old god trap. Voltiel thought the key lay in creating life. Nilvan came up with a plot to usurp the old god's power rather than surpass it. Francois's plan isn't so clear, but whatever he was up to upset his fellow new gods, who implore the dungeon dwellers of the first game to do everything they can to kill him. But we do know he was trying to do something other than raise the world's most annoying boys. Ron Shambara, the Tormented One, probably had the most esoteric goals of the bunch. He doesn't seem too bothered about overthrowing the old gods, or advancing humanity. Instead, he seems to focus on finding the perfect point between pain and pleasure, believing that neither can exist without the other. He is directly inspired by the Cenobites from Hellraiser, more so than any of his colleagues, and is honestly very detached from the grand scheme of things. In the first game he dies, that seems to be the canon outcome anyway, so the former Ron Shambara should be dead, or at least in the Hall of the Gods, and he is. We can find him in there at the very beginning of the game, and that really should be the end of it, but yet, if we can find the dead crow next to the sewer grate, we can take it to an imperfect circle. Offering it will summon everyone's least favourite poet. He's not as powerful as he is in the first game, but he's still a challenge. Defeating him will grant us access to the Chain of Torment ability at the Hexen table. It seems then on the surface that Ronnie Shamboni is just a cameo then, a fun little optional boss and reference to the first game, like the aforementioned Gull brothers. Except Shambara's influence can be found in Prehyville, and he might have broader goals outside of being a neat cameo. In the first game we can encounter the White Angels. The White Angels were creatures chained to the walls of Mahab, and can only be freed after the Tormented One is defeated. The Angels are creations of Ronnie, though the new gods describe them as a manifestation of your grudge during your stay in the dungeon, which I think is a comment that's specifically targeted at Ragnarvolda. He's the only PC who went to the dungeon with the intent of settling a score, and the Outlander shares a soul with the Tormented One. The new gods talk about the Angels in metaphorical terms, which they do for quite a few subjects, which I believe usually means that they don't know much about the topic and are just trying to sound wise or enlightened. In a more literal sense, the Angels appear to be something of a personal project for the Tormented One. In the department store, upon entering, we hear a horrific wail. Following the noise, we ascend the store. We've encountered all kinds of madness up to this point, and despite the store being empty, we can't help but be tense. Eventually we find a horrifying scene. 7 people are chained to the roof of the building, screaming and writhing. The contestants can't tell whether their screams are of pleasure or pain, and to the Tormented One, there fundamentally isn't a difference, and everything he does seems to be trying to prove that point. 2 of the people seem to be in the process of becoming Angels of Torment. The ultimate fate of the other 5 is unknown. Maybe they're just engaging in a crude ritual of worship. Strangely though, there's an 8th man here. His skin is gone. It's possible he's been flayed, in reverence to Shambara. He has a leechmonger ring, a ring created by worshippers of the Depth God. I mean, a group of sadomasochistic hedonists engaging in whatever is hardly the greatest revelation though, which brings us to the final reference of the Tormented One in the game, the new poems of love and torment. The first game also had a book of poems authored by the Tainted One. Admittedly though, the poem in the first game doesn't actually seem to mean much, titled Chained Heart. In my first New Gods video I speculated that somebody broke Shambhara's heart, but now I actually think the poem is Ron discovering the truth of the New God trap and how he feels frustrated by it. The poem we find in Termina is titled Blackened Heart, and I'll read it in full and analyse it. The Blackened Heart. Stakes are high. You are also, and more so. Live your lie and play with my blood torso. Who would believe all your tries? To blacken my name, dead crow as a prize? They say that a tear only dries. So I want to see the day, even Grogoroth cries. They will come to know this day is the cruel age. They will come to know this page is the fourth phase. Won't you die? First of all, who is Ron talking about? The stakes are high, you're also and more so, makes me think that he's talking about Le'garde or the girl, who either wanted to achieve ascension or did. Play with my blood torso, again could be referring to either. Who would believe all your lies? To blacken my name, dead crow as the prize. This line invokes the Crow Mauler, again crafting a link to the girl, who has overtaken the power of the Depth God, but curiously the line accuses somebody of slandering Ron, and there isn't any evidence near the game that such a thing has taken place, unless he's somehow broken the meta and is talking about me specifically. So I want to see the day, even Grogoroth cries. Grogoroth is the god of destruction, and co-head of the Old God Pantheon. He's specifically referred to in masculine terms throughout all the series' texts, making him the patriarch of the Old Gods, and therefore the entire universe. So I wonder if Shambhara is expressing a desire to see him cry, in the sense that he frustrates the Old God's plans and pushes humanity's agenda, or in a sense that he wants to see a softer, more nurturing side to the god of destruction. With Ron it could honestly be either one, or both. The last 3 lines reference the girl's ascension directly, with the final line being, "Won't you die?" which makes me honestly think it's done in mockery, and that the poem is actually fully about Le'garde, namely because it was Le'garde's desire to be the god of the New Age, to be Ulmer come again, and how since the girl has ascended, Le'garde's role in the grand scheme is irrelevant, or seemingly irrelevant, at least on first view. So I actually think that the Tormented One at least has animosity towards the Kaiser, though I'm not sure if he's actively conspiring against him. Like in the first game, it seems that the Tormented One wants to just passive-aggressively write Mardy poetry and have fun with his art projects. And finally, we move on to the final new god we can encounter in Fear and Hunger Termina, the Heartless One. The Heartless One is the hardest of the new gods to find and confront in Preheville. There are moments in a playthrough where you can outright lock yourself out of even meeting this one. For example, if you breach the Church of Ulmer's basement by detaching the chandelier and allowing it to crash through the floor, you'll cut off the area to get to her permanently, and that's the easiest way to get to the church's basement, which is crucial for advancing in the game. To find the Heartless One, you have to enter the Church of Ulmer via the sewage treatment plant. A very challenging location with its own difficult boss lying at the end of it, but getting past it and exploring the foundations of decay, you'll find an elevator. The same elevator that'll take you to the old town slums. Taking it up to the Church of Ulmer, we then have to find the ritual circles, and draw a sigil to rare, an ability that you aren't guaranteed to have in playthroughs. Entering the world, we'll find a being in one of the prison cells, chained from head to toe. The only way to release them is with a rusty key, which can only be acquired from finding it in its real-life counterpart. Freeing it will drop the heart-shaped lock, which must be taken to the imperfect circle. Sacrificing the lock will summon the Heartless One, who immediately tries to kill us. Unlike Ron though, she'll talk to us in combat. What are you? Technically, I'm what you people call a new god, but I hate to be associated with that group of senile warmongering old farts. It's clear from her dialogue that the Heartless One is not aligned with the new gods. But the interesting question is why? Well, in her own words, she says she doesn't want to be associated with a group of senile warmongering old farts. The new gods are warmongers, not just in that they've aided Le'garde in starting the Great War, but also in that they find themselves in an eternal war against the old gods and their legacy. Every action the new gods take is to break away from the old world order. The new god cycle itself is predicated on violence. To become a new god, one has to slay the previous one to ascend, and you will reign until a point in history where your power wanes, and someone else comes to ascend at your expense. And this cycle does breed some animosity in the ranks of the new gods, with Nas'hrah having a particular hatred for the Fellowship. And if my theory is correct, Ron Shambhara hates Le'garde. who was partially responsible for his downfall, but this line also implies that the Heartless One isn't a warmonger. A strange claim to be sure, considering she'll only have a conversation in a fight, and there's no way to pacify her. New God naming convention is straightforward. Francois is the dominating one, because as a human he had a dominating soul. Same as Nas'hrah, who is the enlightened one. The Heartless One implies the existence of a heartless soul, but nobody else in the game has one, so it's hard to tell whether the god is an exception or a rule. Interestingly enough, the new gods have nothing to say when asked about the Heartless One. The Heartless One is possibly one of the most well-known new gods in the world of Fear and Hunger, with a movie existing about the being. It's clear though the Heartless One isn't working with the new gods, and whatever they're up to. So who exactly is the Heartless One in league with? Well, their inventory might offer some insight here. Upon death, she drops some armor and a sword. Her armor is simply called the Darkness, a living and seeping darkness that attaches itself to whoever dares to touch it, and live in symbiosis with it. The darkness is usually associated with the god of the depths. At least in the first game, it's probably a safe assumption that it's now associated with the god of fear and hunger, an ascended one. The second item is a sword, Red Virtue, a masterfully forged light sword. The sword is very light, and so excels in finesse. It is said that Red Virtue is one of the 2 swords forged for the ancient king of Mahab. The ancient king of Mahab is a character referenced very few times in either game, but when he is invoked it's very specific. The only other item belonging to the king in the game is the Crown of Mahab, which Kahara will retrieve during his quest. The new gods claim the king was nominated by the old gods before they left the world, though they're dismissive of him, claiming that they're the true rulers now. Love what you've done with the place, guys. If the Heartless One had one of the king's 2 swords though, it could mean that she might have knew him. The last king of Mahab was almost certainly Ulmer, who we know created the clay figurines in Mahab, and who if we talk to one of them will reference him. The new gods, when asked about this king, will dismiss him. The older gods, before their departure, nominated a king to rule the Mahab and mankind. It's all fallacy. We as the new gods rule the Mahab now. When Ulmer rose from death after his crucifixion, it said he destroyed the rulers of the time, who were new gods. But even after his death, the new gods continued to exist, suggesting that some survived Ulmer's purge, and maybe even worked with the Ascended One. The Heartless One's attacks are all seemingly light-based, with Curse of Light and Pillars of Light, something unique to the Heartless One, and implying a potential old god of light. And it's at this point I have to talk about the Sun God. Mythonics and Shadow the Exotl have already done pretty excellent videos going over the Sun God, so I direct you to them for a more thorough explanation. But the gist of the theory is that Grogoroth, in parallel to Rare, is the god of the sun, whose energy and light is capable of both sustaining and destroying mankind, and that Ulmer became an Ascended One by mantling the power of Grogoroth, who in his own mythology often wears the skin of mortals to gain a renewed understanding of fear. I'll link both videos in the description if you want a more detailed breakdown of their theories. Broadly, I find a lot to agree with in both videos, but I actually think Venushka, whose power specifically deals with fire, growth, decay, and rebirth, might be a more ideal candidate for a so-called sun god. But that's an idea that requires more explanation than I'm going to offer in this video. Regardless, after all was said and done though, Ulmer ruled from Mahab, ruling for about 400 years. The new gods are opinionated, and occasionally very wrong. And oddly, if asked about Ulmer, they have nothing to say, only talking about the being if you ask about the king, which does make some sense. Ulmer is a contradiction after all. He's an Ascended One, a human who became a god, but an entity whose interests align more with the old gods. He slaughtered the new gods after his ascension, pushed for the old gods to be recognized as the true gods during his reign, and his own reign came to a sudden jarring end, at which point the new gods assumed rulership of mankind again, which makes me believe that they may have had something to do with Ulmer's death. The new gods view themselves as the only worthy stewards of mankind. The older gods left us without answers in times of peril, for men to take matters to their own hands. We had to form. It's hard to say though, when asked about Mahab or Ulmer's clay figurines, they're dismissive, calling the prophecy of his return a fallacy. After brief chaos, Ulmer did achieve a 400-year peace until he died, and the chaos and misery of the new gods returned. And I believe this might be what the Heartless One is referring to. I believe the Heartless One wasn't just a new god during the reign of Ulmer, but directly an ally of him, and possibly his strongest lieutenant, if she wields one of his most special swords. In her design, she also has a similar halo, and even what appears to be angel wings. a strong visual reference to her allegiance. But how did she end up here exactly? It seems like the Church of Ulma and Prehevil are aligned with the cult of Sulphur. Sulphur and Ulma's relationship are too big of a topic to fully go into here, but it's pretty clear the Dark Priests of Prehevil went out of their way to keep her locked away, so I think he can rule out that she's working with them. So with all that in mind, we still have a question to answer. Is there a New God conspiracy? In Karen's intro, she believes that the Kaisar and the New Gods are in league with one another. Is that true? Yes, but not all of them. Nas'hrah and the Heartless One are obvious exceptions to start with. The Tainted One encourages the player to kill, to gather heads, to strengthen themselves. The Radiant One encourages us to brave Rare's dimensions, where we might find more gifts of Rare, and maybe even figure out more secrets. And there's no option to engage them in battle, likely meaning they don't want to. It's in the New Gods and the Guard's best interest for the player character to be as powerful as possible, so that they can brave the dangers of Prehevil and activate the bunkers for the Logic Project. So I think those characters at least are directly in line with the Guard and the whole of the New Gods. With the Tormented One, it's hard to say. I'd assume he's in league with them, as he dwells in the hall with the others. It's likely then that the only reason he attacks us after being summoned is because he's genuinely just annoyed we woke him up or something. But I'd speculate that he's pretty disenfranchised by the Guard. I don't know how much Karen is actually able to uncover of the New God's presence in Prehevil, but it's honestly for the best if she didn't encounter any of them. Not only are they dangerous opponents, but their presence just adds confusion to the story's ever-twisting plot. But we can say with some certainty, they aren't completely uniform.